Disclaimer. I am a law student, and the legal information provided is not legal advice. For that, please hire an attorney. Okay. So, recently, someone sent me this video about a YouTuber. Before we talk about the YouTuber specifically, generally speaking, we're going to talk about some interesting intersection of very contentious ideas. But when we're talking about people who detransition, trans people who detransition, a lot of the time it's not in a positive sense. There was the video from Sydney Watson that we reviewed a little bit before. If you didn't watch it, it's on my channel, where she cited like the one detransitioner guy who's like super old that has basically come out and just been like a super fucking anti-trans advocate. Usually when like detransitioners are discussed, it's not in the most positive sense, because a lot of the times like they detransition because of like social issues, or because they aren't comfortable with, or they aren't like happy with surgical results, and they'll take that to mean that transition is a bad thing or something super dangerous for anyone to pursue despite like overwhelming medical advancements. Yeah. So usually it's not brought up in like a positive context, but I think this is a little bit of a different story. So, or at least from what I've heard. So Ryan Barnes is a, I guess, former trans YouTuber. From what I understand, they go by she, her. That's my best knowledge. I'm going to try and refer, like, again, Ryan, if you watch this afterwards, I believe you go by she, her, just based on like the fact that you're detransition, unless you're giving off like super big femboy vibes. I don't know. I'm just gonna refer to they them because I'm not absolutely sure. But my guess is that she transitioned to a guy and then transitioned back, and detransitioned back and is presenting as female. I know her, she's super cool. Okay. Ryan Barnes, she uses female pronoun. Okay, then we'll go with she, her. I am taking chat's assumption. I am taking chat to be true. A trans woman with over 1 million followers called Mandy Candy covered her videos as well. Okay, I don't know her, but yeah, that's cool. So basically, what I've heard about Ryan Barnes, just from hearsay, this is just what I've been told so far, I haven't actually looked at any of her videos, is that she's like a decently good faith detransitioner. Like doesn't like come out and say like a whole bunch of negative shit about like trans people and about the dangers of transition and whatever, right? But that's just by hearsay, right? I was waiting for like a cool opportunity to be able to review one of her videos. And then this came out, right? A detransitioner's thoughts on transgender athletes. Yeah, it's a sensitive subject, and one which I haven't given a lot of coverage. And here's the reason why, fam. Here's the reason why. I'll admit that this is probably one of the harder arguments. Not necessarily that there's a wrong argument. In fact, I think I've got it pretty much down, and I've updated my research doc to reflect it, and we'll be going over it, right? But I do acknowledge that like it is a much more complicated argument. Or at least it's a lot more complicated than other ones that people generally make, right? And so that's kind of why I've been putting it off, because I wanted to try and do it due diligence and wait for a good opportunity. And I felt like this was a good opportunity. So I put in the time and updated my doc concerning that subject. I think that after this, there's basically just like the trans people in prisons argument. And even that, there's probably a lot of sources I already have that go to like address that point. And then I think we're pretty much good. I can't think of any more trans arguments I don't already have in there. But anyway, that aside. So I figured this would be a good opportunity to review Ryan's videos, get an opinion on her, and maybe respond to some arguments. Or who knows, maybe this will be like the Calvin video that we reviewed, and it turned out that actually we agreed a fuck ton. I don't know. But I'm going in with an open mind. So let's get into it. Oh no. Oh no. Oh no, I don't like this mood. I don't like this setup.
Trying to gather my thoughts. Howdy. Howdy, guys. How's it hanging? How's your quarantine been? Has it been kind of, as insane as mine has been? Everybody's still on lockdown, right? Yeah. I have a video for you. Something that I probably should, talk about on my channel, given the nature of my little corner of the internet. Something that I most likely would have ended up talking about eventually if it had come up. I had somebody ask me yesterday, actually, what my thoughts were on transgender women in sports. Not even just transgender women, just transgender people in sports. And I do have an opinion on it. Some people aren't gonna like it, but some shit's just gonna get said. Not everybody has to agree with me, and that's fine. For everybody who's new to my channel, I am a female to male to female detransitioner, which means that I was born a biological female, and then I transitioned to become a trans man.
Anytime that people use terms like biological female doesn't exactly signal, I don't know, it's not exactly setting me off in the best way. It's not determinative, but I am on edge.
Because I honest to God thought that was the right decision for me at the time, and I basically went on hormones. I fully transitioned for about 2 years, a little less, before I realized that was the worst decision I could have made, and that I'm not transgender after all, once I got my head out of my ass, and then I detransitioned. And it's been, oh boy, I don't know, like 6 months or so since I've detransitioned, I think, guesstimating, maybe a little less. It hasn't been that long, and here I am now. Yeah. And I make YouTube videos about it, because apparently people like to listen to what I blabber about. But yeah, transgender athletes. My thoughts. I have an opinion on it. It's not,
All right, then let's hear. There's so much suspense now. Just spit it out.
Like I said, it might not be the popular opinion. But I'm gonna say it anyways, because why the hell not, I really, honest to God, don't care. Come at me. But
this is giving off a lot of, like, intellectual dark web vibes. This might not be the popular opinion, but I'm gonna say it, damn it. Yeah.
But what I have seen on the internet lately has been videos of, and we're talking Olympic level sports here. We're not talking about high school, any of that jazz. We're talking about like the top level athletes. And there's been videos of women weightlifting champions, track and field, and pretty much in almost all aspects of transgender women who had spent a majority of their life as a biological male, living as a man, and then they transitioned to become a female, a woman, and then they play sports in women's sports.
Oh no. Oh no. This is not going over well, fam. I'm predicting trans people taking advantage of sex differences to gain an advantage in sports argument.
And a lot of people are crying outrage. Some people are defending them and saying it's equal, we're keeping it equal. And, is it fair? No. Obviously.
All right, we'll talk about this in a little bit, but I'm going to let her... All right, we're going to talk about this because it is a complicated subject, all right? But I'm going to let her talk for a little bit.
It's not fair. Should all transgender people be banned from playing sports? No. I think it should be taken on a case-by-case basis. Maybe there should be like a little board to review and see what percentage of your advantage is, and then go from there. It's obviously fucking not fair. Somebody who had spent 30 years of their life living as a man, and then goes to compete in a women's weightlifting championship, and crushes records, obviously that's not fair. You have an advantage. You should be ashamed of yourself for playing at that level, because that is not sportsmanlike. You gotta know. And the people who say that, that's fair, women are just as capable as doing that stuff as men are, man, miss me with that bullshit, man. I'm not talking about whether or not women can, okay?
Alright. So here's the thing, fam. There are going to be some parts of this argument that are going to overlap with what research I've done, but there are going to be some that are not, right? So again, this can get really messy. I'm not sure if I hold this necessarily against her, because it is a hard argument, alright? Like, if we're going to, like, level all of the trans arguments, like, on terms of, like, difficulty, right? Like, what would be, like, a super easy argument? Like, risk of detransition, that's, like, super low-hanging fruit. That's, like, super, like, really low tier. Whether or not, like, gender is a social construct, that's, like, mid-tier. Trans people in sports, this is, like, high tier, right? So let's talk about this. All right. Should trans women be allowed to compete in women's sports and vice versa? There's a lot here. All right. That's intentional because I wanted to do this due diligence. All right. So hang with me. We're going to go on a ride and just stick with me until the end. You might be speculative. You might be skeptic, but it goes to a good place. And actually, well, hold on. Do I incorporate that? Yeah, I do. So the issue, thank you for subscribing. The issue is, should trans women be allowed to compete in women's sports and vice versa for trans men? I mean, most of the time the scrutiny is put on trans women, right? But I mean, like, this includes trans men, non-binary people, like all trans people, right? It is an all-encompassing issue, though trans women are usually the focus. So let's begin. According to a systematic literature review relating to sports participation and competitive sports policies concerning trans people published in October 2016 in Sports Medicine, researchers found that there is no direct or consistent research suggesting that transgender female individuals or male individuals had an athletic advantage at any stage of their transition, example, cross-sex hormones, gender-confirming surgery, and that therefore competitive sports policies that place restrictions on transgender people need to be considered and potentially revised. They also found that transgender people have a mostly negative experience in competitive sports because of the restrictions that sports policies placed on them, and that the majority of transgender competitive sports policies that were reviewed were not evidence-based. So that's where we start from. Actually, people might remember this because I cited this in the very first debate I had against Transbra, all right? And some people have come after me for it. The evidence is still very clear, right? Now, what this says specifically is that evidence up until when this research was conducted shows that, like, policies that have been promulgated up until this point have been largely just based on, like, assumptions and prejudices against trans people, right? So let's start from there, you know? The policies that exist right now overwhelmingly are not based on empirical evidence, right? They're based on culture, right? They're based on, like, this cultural societal expectation or distinction, these categories of men and women's sports, right? That we've just developed over the course of society, over the course of human history, to try and differentiate people according to, like, societally constructed categories, right? And that's clearly not substantiated by, like, any form of evidence, you know? And then disproportionately, trans people have, like, really shitty experiences. And yeah, no shit, you know? Like, if you have I don't know if anyone who's trans who's competed in sports can sign off on this, but I'm terrified to compete in any sports ever because I know that if I do well, that the first thing that people will say will be something to the effect of, oh, well, she was basically gonna win from the beginning. Like, she basically already had it in the bag. It's almost like cheating. And that's what they say, right? So let's start from here. Like, this is the baseline that we operate from. Most policies that currently exist are not evidence-based. All right? That's where we start from. Stop making these! Or is this one from earlier? RGR what? Okay. But this is where we get into sort of the weeds, right? Because now we're going to talk about some studies that have been conducted since this was conducted. But according to a study looking at the effects of testosterone and athletic performance published in the Endocrine Reviews in October 2018, quote, the available, albeit incomplete, evidence makes it highly likely that sex difference in circulating testosterone of adults explains most, if not all, the sex differences in sporting performance. Additionally, in a case analyzing the race times for 8 transgender female runners who have competed in distance races as both male and female using a mathematical model called age grading published in the Journal of Sports Cultures and Identities in 2015. Okay, so this was right around that time. As a group, the 8 study participants had remarkably similar age grade scores in both male and female gender, making it possible to state that transgender women run distances at rates approximately the same level for their respective gender, both before and after gender transition. Lastly, in a publication in the Journal of Medical Ethics in 2018, the authors concluded that while inclusion, and this is probably where it gets, like, to the main point, right? And this is why this argument is complicated. While inclusion is an important principle of sport, including elite sport, inclusion does not outweigh the importance of fairness for cis women athletes. This is starting to sound like turfy logic. Stick with me. It's a bumpy ride, fam. The performance advantage likely held by trans women is not a tolerable unfairness. This is not an attempt to exclude trans women from elite sport. Instead, we conclude that it is important to both extend and celebrate diversity while maintaining fairness for cis women in sport. To be simultaneously inclusive and fair at the elite level, the male-female binary must be discarded in favor of a more nuanced must be discarded for a more nuanced approach. We conclude that the gender binary in sport has perhaps had its day. Okay? It was a bit of a rough quote for a bit there, right? There's some language in there that's like, oh shit, this is about to be like a turfy conclusion. But I think that the argument stands on its merits, right? Because there might be, for some people, based on like the amount of testosterone in their blood at various points throughout their life, there might be a demonstrable advantage in sports, right? Does that mean that we should? But the problem with that is does that mean that we should like define trans women out of women's sports? Well, no, because that means that they're either going to have to compete in men's sports or not compete at all, right? What you have, well, we'll talk about this a little bit later. Or actually, no, we'll talk about the next quote, and then we'll get to the analysis. Now I'll explain a lot of it, right? This makes sense, since according to a publication in the Nature International Weekly Journal of Science, quote, biologists have been building a more nuanced view of sex, but society has yet to catch up. True, more than half a century of activism from members of the lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender community has softened as social attitudes to sexual orientation and gender. Many societies are now comfortable with men and women crossing conventional social boundaries in their choice of appearance, career, and sexual partners. But when it comes to sex, there is still intense social pressure to conform to the binary model. Yet if biologists continue to show that sex is on a spectrum, then society and state will have to grapple with the consequences and work out where and how to draw the line. Many transgender and intersex activists dream of a world where a person's sex or gender is irrelevant. Although some governments are moving in this direction, Greensberg is pessimistic about the prospects of realizing this dream, in the United States at least. I think to get rid of gender markers altogether or allow a third indeterminate marker is going to be difficult. Here's the analysis, right? Here's the argument. The current policies that exist concerning trans people's abilities to compete in the sports are not based on evidence of unfair advantage. What evidence that does exist on the matter is limited, and most transgender people who have competed in sports have consequently had negative experiences. Again, that is the baseline that we operate from. We are not moving an inch from there, all right? That is infallibly all true. The limited evidence available suggests that most, if not all, of sex differences in sports competitions can be attributed to the effects of testosterone in the body. Side note, this means that it is only all the more important to allow transgender youth access to puberty blockers and HRT as medically appropriate for their age. TERFs, I'm looking at you, wanting to like simultaneously prohibit like trans youth from being able to get hormone blockers, but then like criticizing trans women from being able to participate in sports because of unfair advantages. I'm looking at you. What this means is not that trans women should be excluded from competitions in sports, since right now the only alternative is to compete in men's sports, or not to compete at all, but rather to call for a complete revision of how to decide who competes against who in sports. This is not a call to abolish sporting institutions. Again, I love sports. I competed in sports in college and high school. Like, I love it. It was a massive part of my life. But rather to adapt it to new discoveries about the nature of the human body relating to biological sex in order to achieve a more authentic and pure meritocracy. Even without the presence of trans people, this can be observed in the mistreatment of cis people with levels of testosterone in their blood which varies from what is normal for most people of that gender. I don't know why this is crap. For example, Caster Semenya is a professional. We actually talked about her earlier this stream. We're coming full circle. Is a professional cis woman athlete who, because of an intersex condition, has naturally high testosterone levels. Now, there's the fact that she has higher testosterone than the average cis woman by virtue of nothing in her control, and therefore she may have some athletic advantage, meaning that she should be prohibited from competing with her assigned at birth gender category. Should she compete with men? These instances, in addition to relatively new presence of trans people in sports, makes it clear that having strictly binary categories of men's and women's sports is unfair and disadvantages people who are not cisnormative. The conclusion is that, therefore, the question is not so much whether trans women should be allowed to compete in women's sports and vice versa for trans men, but rather how we should revise sports competition categories to allow for people of all bodies and all gender expressions to be able to participate in a more authentic meritocracy. That's what sports are supposed to be. They are supposed to be a meritocracy where you compete against people of similar backgrounds and similar capabilities so that you can come out on top. That's the point. This is a subject with limited research at the moment, but it should be left to academics to study and discern objective means, separate from someone's gender, to determine who competes against who. Developing these kinds of categories are not new. For example, we have had various divisions for inter-school competition to attempt to have people compete against more fair opponents already, so this shouldn't present any major issues for researchers. Like when I competed in high school football, like we were like division like 5 or 7. Like we didn't compete against like the toughest schools ever because like people recognized that like it was appropriate to have categories decided objectively so that you could have teams face against people who are more appropriate opponents, right? And that's all that we would call for here, right? That's all that the evidence suggests is what we should do is we should move away from like a gender-based categorization of how to like have people compete against each other and rather to put research and time into looking into objective categories so that everyone can compete against people who it's more fair for them to compete against, regardless of their gender, regardless of their if they have intersex conditions, regardless if they're trans, cis, whatever. Because that's how we get to a more fair competition or like a structure of competition in society. All right. That's my argument. And it's a complicated one, but it's my argument. I stand by it. So that being said, I kind of sympathize with her. I recognize that there might be like a disproportionate advantage, but that's not like the trans women's fault, right? And I wouldn't put the onus on them. And if there's a problem, it's a problem with the way that the competition is structured to begin with. And we need like a more drastic revision of how to do sports from here.
Sports are separated, not by gender, but by biological sex. And they're separated by biological sex for a reason.
Okay, hold on. Fuck. I think we have to make the biological sex argument. Okay, hold on. I didn't think that we were going to be doing this. I think we're doing the biological sex argument. Okay. So first, let's start with this. Let's start here. Because this is also something that I updated today. All right? So this will actually also be really good. Because someone actually sent me some information on like alternative theories of biological sex. And yeah. So let's talk about this for a bit, all right? Issue. Are trans women biologically male and vice versa for trans men? Okay? So let's begin. Here's a graphic from Scientific American describing the many characteristics which factor into one's sexual identity. This shows the ambiguous and bimodal nature of sex, and that sex is not as simple as XX or XY. Biological sex is on a bimodal distribution, not direct binary. Again, see source here. And also in my research doc, there's a link to like a much more clearer version of it if you want to take a look at it. Another publication in Scientific American elaborates on the subject. Quote, sex is supposed to be simple, at least in the molecular level. The biological explanations that appear in textbooks amount to X plus X equals girl, X plus Y equals boy, Venus or Mars, pink or blue, right? This goes to like the gamete model or like the chromosome model of sex, right? As science looks more closely, however, it becomes increasingly clear that a pair of chromosomes do not always suffice to distinguish girl-boy, either from the standpoint of sex, biological traits, or of gender, social identity. To varying extents, many of us are biological hybrids on a male-female continuum. Researchers have found XY cells in a 94-year-old woman, and surgeons discovered a womb in a 70-year-old man, the father of 4. New evidence suggests that the brain consists of a mosaic of cell types, some more yin, others further along on the yang scale. Additionally, here's a quote from a publication in Sage Journals of the Modern Scientific Attitudes on Human Sex. Quote, the view that the world's population can be separated into a clearly defined dyadic unit of male and female is defunct. Not only clinical observations, but molecular biology has established that sexual identity is on a continuum with an enormous potential for variance. Additionally, according to the Canadian Institutes of Health Research, quote, sex refers to a set of biological attributes in humans and animals. It is primarily associated with physical and physiological features including chromosomes, gene expression, hormone levels and function, and reproductive and sexual anatomy, right? It is a factored-based analysis based on a totality of sexual-related features. Sex is usually categorized as male or female, but there's a variation in biological attributes that comprise sex and how those attributes are expressed. Additionally, according to Discover magazine, and this actually is the same quote that we read earlier. Oh wait, no, actually no, it's not. Sorry, but that does exist. That is down a little bit earlier, or a little bit later. Additionally, according to a publication in Discover magazine, quote, an increasing recognition of biological complexity by researchers and the public has affirmed that gender sits on a spectrum. People are more and more willing to acknowledge the reality of non-binary and transgender identities and to support those who courageously fight for their rights in everything from all gender bathrooms to anti-gender discrimination laws. But underlying all of this is the perception that no matter the gender a person identifies as, that they have an underlying sex that they were born with. This represents a fundamental misunderstanding about the nature of biological sex. Science keeps showing us that sex also doesn't fit in the binary, whether it be determined by genitals, chromosomes, hormones, or bones, which are the subject of this person's research. The perception of a hard and fast separation between the sexes started to disintegrate during the second wave of feminism in the 1970s and 1980s. It is the decades that followed where we learned that about 1.7% of babies are born with intersex traits. That behavior, body shape, and size overlap significant between the sexes, and both men and women have the same circulating hormones, right? And that is nothing inherently, and that there's nothing inherently female, quote unquote, about the X chromosome, right? It's not like if you put a X chromosome under a magnifying glass that it says female on it, right? Like it's just kind of a neutral thing that exists in everyone. Biological realities are complicated. People living their lives as women can be found even late in the life as to be XXY or XY, right? Additionally, according to a publication in Massive Science, just like gender isn't binary, our biology isn't binary either. It too exists on a spectrum. In fact, many people's bodies possess a combination of physical characteristics typically thought of as male or female. As one example, some people with androgen insensitivity have XY chromosomes, internal testes, and external female genitalia. Traits, including hormone levels, can vary widely both within and across sexes, but people who fall outside of what's considered normal face discrimination. This is the quote that we read earlier. It goes to the idea that like we need to probably move away from like a binary category and approach a more nuanced view of what sex is, right? The analysis of this is that there is modern scientific consensus that binary terms like biological male and biological female are outdated and non-descriptive terms which do not adequately capture the current state of humanity. This is because since biological sex is on a spectrum, when we choose to label someone as biologically male or biologically female, that is determined by society, not by science. So when you attempt to present societally constructed terms as empiric authority, it is, to an extent, scientific fiction. Thank you. This also represents a vast departure from the theory defining human sex according to gametes that a body produces. Throughout early historical study into the nature of biological sex, the prevailing theory of human sex determination has been that sex is determined in the developing gonad, and gonadal sex hormones in turn trigger sex determination and differentiation in non-gonadal tissues. Here's a link to where I got that, and it's also a pretty cool breakdown of like the vast different ways that biological sex is determined in nature. It's an interesting read. But this definition can be broken down into three premises. First, every human has gonads, which produce one of two gametes. Second, the gonads a human is born with determines what hormones are prevalent in a human being. And third, the presence of a predominant sex hormone triggers sex determination and differentiation in non-gonadal tissues. The problem with this definition, specifically with premise 2, is that the aforementioned research demonstrates that though this may be true for most people, it is increasingly apparent that this does not describe all people. Not only are there cis people who may have some intersex condition which will affect the proportion of sex hormones in their body, like the woman we talked about earlier, And not only are there trans people who may undergo hormone replacement therapy, which will directly alter sex hormones in the body regardless of what gonads they were born with, and not only do some trans people undergo surgery to alter or change the gonads they were born with, but there are also just cis people who don't have intersex conditions, who just have atypical levels of a sex hormone that's commonly associated with their gender, right? Maybe these are the people, like, these are probably the people that have been labeled like the soy boys, right? Like people who are just assigned male at birth, but who end up like not having as much testosterone as everyone else, right? Like, do we say that they're less of a man because they don't have as much testosterone in their body? I would say no, although Sargon has said yes. So I guess if that's like the logical conclusion, that like the amount of testosterone in your body determines how much of a man you are, then I guess, yeah, that's how you arrive at that logical conclusion. But that's just not realistic nowadays. That's not how society recognizes sex. This issue becomes amplified in this model's consideration of people who have features atypical to a binary categorization of producing one of two types of gametes. This is because this model simply classifies anyone who does not fit into either of the two categories as a hermaphrodite, which is a great term. The danger of this classification, as recognized by the sources above, the sources we've already talked about, is that it disregards those who do not fit into the binary classification of human sex as effectively a rounding error on the basis that they don't fit into a common function of reproduction. The fact that you can't look at someone else and automatically determine what genitals they have, because that's definitely what's on people's minds. While there may have been a time in human history where that classification may have been more accurate or necessary for the survival of humans as a species, that's not the case today. Trans women can have trans women can have children with cis women, cis men with trans men, non-binary people with intersex conditions with others, and any variation thereof, right? Like, you can mix it all together and can throw out something, and you probably will end up with a child if you really want to. And whereas there may have been a time in our long in our past that human beings looked at each other with a primary intent of reproducing, that's not the case today. Most normal people don't look at each other and think first about whether the other person is a possible mate for reproducing. I don't know about you. Maybe that's just me. I don't look at every person on the street and think about whether or not they're a possible mate for reproducing. I don't tend to do that. Maybe I'm just out of the norm there, but I don't constantly look at whether or not I'm not always thinking about someone else's genitals. I don't know. Maybe I'm just not in the normal there. I don't know. I'm sorry. How we view biology or biological sex today is based on more of a holistic analysis of the totality of primary and secondary sexual characteristics as referenced by the sources above, which is more descriptively correct, since this takes people who have been previously reduced down to a single category of hermaphrodite and finds where they exist along the existing bimodal distribution of sexual identity. Which is a long, long way to say, no, trans women are not biologically male, and vice versa for trans men. Okay? Someone threw me some articles, I think in good faith, right, about like this alternative theory of human sex. And like, I did try to go over it and give it due diligence. I feel like this is basically because, like, yeah, there's a long prevailing theory of biological sex as determined by gametes and genitals. But I think it's pretty clear based on the aforementioned studies, scientific consensus, and analysis that that's just not practicable for today's society. So again, I'm not trying to like trash. I think you're acting in good faith. It's hard to tell because I've heard a lot of similar rhetoric from people who I definitely don't think are acting in good faith. But like, no.
So this shit doesn't happen. And by you saying and mixing it with the transgender athletes and everything like that, saying, oh, it's fair, you know, it's like, why don't we just, if they don't have an advantage, right? If being biologically male doesn't affect their advantage whatsoever, and it's still perfectly fair, then what the hell is the point in us separating men and women's sports at all? Let's just...
The point is, well, no, we have to, like I said, like the idea is to move towards a more holistic perspective or more holistic function, categorization of sports based not so much on like arbitrary societally constructed categories and more just based on like objective factors. Like, I don't know, maybe we have like a test or like a series of like tests that people have to perform, like how fast they can run a certain like a certain distance or how much weight they can lift in certain activities, right? And we assign like who they compete against based on factors like that. Like, we just want to make sure that we're moving towards a way to organize society, and in this case like sports specifically, which is ideal, which is tailored so that we don't exclude people, like in this case trans women, but other similar people, right? Including the woman with an intersex condition who just happened to have higher testosterone than normal and couldn't compete without, like, I think that she had to take like hormone suppressors. That's what Mia told me towards like in our initial discussion, right? But we want to be able to not like force people to like change their body or like medically alter their body so that they can compete in sports, right? We want people to be able to compete as they are, or just like work out and get to a place where they're able to compete in a more like genuine meritocracy. That's it.
Just completely mix the two. You know, let's let everybody play against everybody. No separation, just one sport. It's not men's tennis or women's tennis. It's just tennis. Obviously fucking not, right? Because that's not fair.
Okay, come on, no. Don't do that. All right, that's a bad opinion.
It's just, people are so damn obsessed these days about doing what's equal.
There are even sports that do break down based on classes or weight classes at the moment. Yeah, like wrestling is like that, right? Like having more features like that just don't really take a look at like gender. Like that'd be awesome, you know? Like having just more objective categories for determining what people say. I'll rewind so that people can hear.
Obviously fucking not, right? Because that's not. Play against everybody. No separation, just one sport. It's not men's tennis or women's tennis. It's just tennis. Obviously fucking not, right? Because that's not fair. It's just, people are so damn obsessed these days about doing what's equal and making everybody happy and being so afraid to say something controversial because...
Okay, hold on. That's wildly speculative, and that's kind of morally impugning me and other people who just want like more equality. Like that's kind of that's not great. Come on there. It's not about not wanting to say a controversial opinion. It's about wanting to like make sure that we're actually living in a society which is more inclusive so that like we don't just like prohibit people from being able to compete in sports because of like who they are, you know? I generally like Ryan Barnes, but she's not well informed and this is a bad take. That's basically what I'm getting.
Because you're gonna piss somebody off and you're gonna offend a certain group of people. Well, maybe those group of people are a little bit of kind of snowflakes, and some shit just gotta get said. All right, so certain people competing in certain sports is not fair, and I think what a lot of people these days, a lot of people just do not understand that fair.
I felt like she was gonna say trans advocate or like trans activist. I really like. I feel like she could be cool. I just really don't want her to turn into like a pseudo Rose of Dawn. Actually, she'd be like much worse because she has like 80K. Starting to just like trash on like trans advocates, ruining sports and feminism for everyone. I'm sorry. Apparently, she would also get like a British accent sometime along the way in my head. But I just don't. I don't want to see that.
Does not always mean equal, and equal does not always mean fair. Okay,
Wait, sports are supposed to be a meritocracy. Sports are supposed to be a place where you can be able to compete against other people in the most fair way possible. Like that's the principal basis for sports, right? If you didn't have that, then like there's basically no reason to compete in sports, because like if you're going to compete against people who you know are going to beat you, and like certainly, and this is, I guess, like, I don't know, like I want to be very careful with my wording, because if I don't word it carefully, then people will take this to be like, oh, well, you're arguing for the opposition, right? But like we need to be able to develop categories where people can have like more fair competition, and which does not categorically exclude certain people because they don't fit in what is common, like current categories that we use today, right? This isn't about like trying to make people unfair. It's about doing the opposite. It's about trying to make a system which is fair for everyone.
Thing can be equal, as in sports, but that does not make it fair. Okay, not fair to the majority. And guess what? Sports isn't fair. I mean, life isn't fair. Lots of things aren't fair just because you are... Please. Just I feel like we all as a whole just need to pull.
This sucks. It's like a mentality like I hate this because this is the way that a lot of people I see who are like very politically apathetical get into. Thank you for subscribing. But it's like it's very like, oh well, this is just the way that life is, so we better just accept it. You know, this is just the way that it is, so you know it's just unfair. Deal with it. It's like the same kind of people who are like, yeah, you know, capitalism as the way it is right now. Yeah, it's just kind of unfair. You know, you just better deal with it. It's the way that life is. It's the way it's always been. It's the way it's always going to be, right? It's like the same kind of mindset. Like there's no capacity to be able to understand what a different system could look like. And honestly, it wouldn't be hard. Like literally, like I could perceive researchers just testing this by having like smaller test leagues, right? Just send out like a you know, like a request letter, like, hey, college students, we'll pay you $20 to come and compete in our test league that we're doing for research purposes, where you're going to be assigned into categories not based on your sex or your gender, but based on different objective categories. And then they could just do tests on it, and that's all they would have to do. That's it. Like, it's not hard, you know? And I get that, like, it might be hard to picture what it... I get that it might be hard to picture what it is, but just because you've grown up with a certain way of living doesn't mean that's the way it has to be, you know? It's very apathetical.
Pull our heads out of our asses and realize what fucking idiots we're being. I mean, why is this even a topic of discussion? I mean, it's like...
It's a topic of discussion because some people are categorically excluded from being able to compete in sports because of factors which are outside of their control. That's it.
Really? Really? Do I honestly need to make this video? Probably not. I mean, but I'm going to anyways. So, and I know some people say it's like, oh, it's fair. And what people don't understand is just because, you know, specifically because sports are separated by biological gender or biological sex and not gender, does not mean that if I tell a transgender woman who spent 30 years of her life as a man and has a very distinct advantage, say in whatever sport she wants to play, if I tell her that she can't play at an Olympic level at that sport because it's not fair, it's not sportsmanlike, that does not mean that I'm invalidating your existence. That doesn't mean that I'm saying you're not a woman. It's not the same thing, because sex and gender are not the same thing, okay? Even when
Hey. So, black people, I understand that you might, you know, like we're totally equal in all the ways that matter. We're totally equal in all the ways that matter, but you know, it's not anything against you personally. It's just better for all of us if you stick to using bathrooms and drinking fountains for y'all, and we stick to doing our thing. It's nothing against you personally. I'm not like invalidating you. You're totally the same as us. But it's just better that we keep these categories because it's just what's best for all of us. It's what's most fair. Don't clip. Fuck. Fuck me. yeah, clipped and shipped. Yeah, send it off, you motherfuckers. It was a good point. Shut up. That was a good point. All right, that was a good goddamn point.
I was a trans guy. Yeah, I identified my gender as a guy, but my biological sex would have always been a woman because it's just the chromosomes, bro. You can't change your chromosomes. That doesn't mean that at the time.
But in case it's not clear enough, a lot of these arguments were like basically used by race realists. Like you just take out gender and you put in race, and it's like almost identical. RGR out of context. There is an RGR out of context, right? But these are the same kind of arguments that were used against black people to prevent black people from being able to compete in sports for the longest time, right? Oh, they just have a disproportionate biological advantage, right? And then we let black people compete in sports, and it was fine. Amazing. Ouch. Whenever I see detransitioner videos, I always wonder if they'll retransition. I don't know.
Time I thought I was any less of a guy, but it's just science. It's just biology, all right? And it's sports isn't fair, okay? It's not. You gotta grow up. You gotta get used to it, all right?
Listen, this is just the way that life is. You just gotta get used to it. You just gotta get used to it. It's just the way that life is. There's no point in changing it. Don't even think about changing it. It's just the way that life is. I feel sad. This is just like such a restricted way of thinking about this. think Ryan got the men biologically. Yeah. I'm getting that perception as well.
Some things in life ain't fair. You can't please everybody. And the majority of transgender, or the majority of athletes, at least at an Olympic level, are not transgender. That's not the norm. That's not the majority there. So screwing, essentially, everybody else over, making everybody else cater to just a few people, I mean, this isn't like society or something. I mean, sports is not...
You know, a lot of people, yeah, you know, it's not worth letting trans people in women's bathrooms because it's just like a couple people, right? It's just a rounding error, you know? And isn't it more important that we just maintain the status quo? Because, like, there might be some women, even though there's no evidence actually women really care all that much based on the current evidence. But isn't it just better that we keep the categories out of convenience? Isn't just... Actually, no, hold on. Here's a better one. Because that's a good analogy, but here's a better one. You know, I hear the argument that we should allow, you know, integrated schools, right? Like, I hear you, Supreme Court justices in Brown v. Board of Education, and you know, like, yeah, we'll definitely integrate schools with all deliberate speed, with all deliberate speed, right? I think that's the terminology. You know, that's totally cool, but like, it's just like super hard because, like, you know, we basically already have this way that everyone has been doing this for as long as we can remember, and like, it's just super fucking hard, and it would just take like a lot of resources and a lot of effort on our part. And wouldn't it just be better to keep it like, we can make it so that they have separate but equal you know, schooling, right? Like, we can it's all the fucking clip and shit. Fuck me. But yeah, we could totally do that, right? Like, we can have, like, they can do their thing and we can do ours and everyone will be happy, right? Because that argument played out historically really, really well. Now I guess the analogy would be a little different here, considering that, like, trans people are not, like, as proportionately comprising of, like, the population as Black people were back then. But it's basically the same idea, right? You have a population of people who want fundamental change in the system, and people arguing that we shouldn't do it because it's inconvenient and probably disproportionate to what a lot of people in society want, right? And that's not great, because it kind of just shits on those people, and it's kind of like, well, yeah, but life sucks. Deal with it. And that's not how we should organize society. It's not.
It's not fair. And that's fine. It's not supposed to be fair. Okay, it's competitive sport. And you have biological advantage. So pull your head out of your ass and realize how unfair that is to people who, you know, are competing in that sport. And, quit. But, let me say that does not go for everybody. I think that honestly, in all seriousness, it should be on a case-by-case basis. Because some people have been transitioning ever since they were a child, and they don't really have those biological advantages. You know, they didn't really go through all puberty, you know, or their development.
Okay, you're starting to get the right idea. Yeah, clearly there are some people who are able to compete in sports because they don't have the... Like, again, I'm not necessarily disagreeing with the idea that some people may have, like, sex advantages based on the amount of testosterone in them. That seems to be tentatively supported by the current evidence on the subject. But to say that just means that we shouldn't allow them to compete at all and just keep the way that things are is ridiculous. You know? You're correctly identifying a problem, but you are not providing any adequate solution. Just because you think it's the way things are. And I don't know. You think a little bit more.
Mental stages as a guy, or with all the testosterone, because some people do take hormone blockers, and, you know, some people, they don't really go through that advantage, you know, and so that's why I think, yeah, it should be decided. It's not just a blanket statement, all transgender people can't compete. That's not, because that's not fair either. But I'd say the majority, at least in an Olympic level, are all not fair. And that's just my thoughts on it. Yeah. Let me know if anybody disagrees with me, and and why, and how. You know, at least I use, facts to back up my stuff.
Wait a second! Hold on. Hold on. Hold on. Facts? Was there one citation? Is there any citation in here? Is there any citation? Oh, your Instagram and your Twitter. Hold on. Hold on. I'm sorry. You had, like, I was vibing with you for a while. Ryan, it seems like the video's over, so you know what? I might have to do some editing and cutting. Hold on.
Facts to back up my stuff. I didn't use facts in this video. I shouldn't have said that. I can use.
Oh my god, I actually stopped at like the perfect time. All right, I'll do some editing in post. All right, I'll do some editing in post. That was just like the worst time to stop there. All right, you know what? All right, hey, you know, credit where credit is due.
Them if you want. Debate me in the chat if you or in the yeah.
But all right, then there you go. She just acknowledged she didn't use facts. Okay. Yeah. I guess that doesn't really change my argument, but it does change like my, I don't know. She's more honest, so that's cool. But yeah, I don't think it affects my argument.
Comments below if you want, or if you agree with me, why you agree. I mean, playing sports is not a privilege. I'm sorry, it's not.
Is a privilege, not a right. Yeah, but why are some people like categorically prohibited from being able to participate in that thing, right? Like, it's literally like if you have people, like what you're doing is you're like categorically defining people out. Like saying it's a privilege and not a right is saying that like some people in society are entitled to that privilege and some people are just not. And that's kind of shitty, right? Like that just kind of sounds like discrimination. I don't know about you. But like saying that they're, you know, just white people are entitled to the privilege of using the fancy bathrooms, you know? Like it's a privilege, not a right. We're not saying anything negative about the people who aren't allowed to use that, you know? It's just a privilege, right? We're not saying anything about the people who aren't allowed to use it. It's just a privilege. It's just a privilege. Like, no. No, Ryan. That's a bad take.
I mean, that's just the way it is. You know, we as a society need to stop.
Now I need to watch to the end to make sure I don't miss anything else.
Diapers when they get pissed off and upset, or offended, or triggered, or good God, the world does not revolve around you. It's not my job to make.
It's not about the world revolving around you. It's about like, I mean, can you like, dear God, you used to think you were trans or present as like a trans guy. Fuck, do you understand that like what it feels like for the world to treat you like shit by virtue of the fact that you're trans? Don't you think that's kind of shitty? And that we shouldn't live in a society like that? Or is it just like, oh, well, that's the way it is, so we might as well just deal with it? No, right? We need to try and change it, because if that was the mentality that we took with like any social issue, then like we probably would still have slavery, and we probably still have like a lot of racism in society, and we probably wouldn't have like any of the LGBT rights that we currently have. Like that's such a bad mentality to take. Just to say that, oh, well, that's the way that things are, so we might as well not change it. Rip. It's a privilege, not a right. Deal with it. Just the way things are. It's not good.
Make you feel better. It's nobody's job. That's your job. Make yourself feel better. If you're offended, then
don't do the fucking... Oh my god, it's a personal responsibility take. Oh my god. Hey, black people. If you don't like how your life is, just pull yourself up by the bootstraps, you know? Like, if you're poor, just stop being poor. Just stop being poor, damn it. It's on you. You gotta be the one to make that choice. You gotta be the one to make that choice to stop being poor. It's all on you. Just be white, forehead. God, there are so many bad clips from this video. I'm gonna die. This is such a bad... Oh my god, like, Ryan, no!
Figure out why, and quit. I've rambled enough for one video. But, yeah. Anyways, let me know what you guys think. Thank you guys for watching so much. I appreciate it. Yeah, so I will catch you guys in the next one.
Yeah. Why did it immediately go to a Rose of Dawn video?! Let's have a chat, alright? I'm gonna collect myself. I'm going to collect myself, all right? Now, I'm not sure what your operative definition of what a fact is. And again, this is my first time watching you, and based on the reputation that other people have told me about, my understanding is that you are someone who acts in decently good faith, okay? That is my current understanding of you. And I want to try and reciprocate that. Because right now you seem like someone who doesn't really know that much about the subject matter. And I think I've demonstrated that like I've done a lot of research on this. And again, my sources are fully publicly available. All right, go and read them and check them to your heart's content. I feel like I did a good job proving my points. But like when you're saying that you're citing facts, I want you to be really careful because there are a lot of really, really not great people who use that exact same kind of rhetoric and this isn't the only instance of this. There are actually a couple instances throughout your video where people will employ the kind of rhetoric of, yeah, I'm just citing facts here. I'm just citing straight facts, you know? I'm just talking about the facts here. And then they don't cite anything, and actually it turns out that they're not citing facts, but rather they're talking about what they feel like the facts are. It's not great. And like, I just want you to consider, all right, consider the evidence I presented to you. But like, I don't know, I just don't want to see, like, my main concern coming out of this, like, I think I've presented a decent amount of like evidence to be able to support my positions, right? But like, practically speaking, I don't want you to turn into like someone that like a lot of trans people have to worry about. You seem like a cool person, all right? Or at least from what I'm told, you're supposed to be a cool person, right? And I really don't want to end up in a situation where a couple like months or years down the line, we're all talking about the detransitioned version of Blair White, and it's Ryan Barnes. Or I guess it wouldn't be because that would be like a guy, like the detransition counterpart to Blair White, like the person who is adjacent by virtue of their identity to the trans community, who just like constantly shits on it. I really don't want you to be that person. So please, if you watch this, take what I have said into consideration. Read. We can chat sometime. I'm totally cool with chatting. I would love to. And I don't know, just consider what I've said. All right? That's it.